Unspoken Issues.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Unspoken Issues. We are back, and we are going to be talking one of those great polls that we put up there on the Unspoken Decade Facebook page. August 10th, we put up a poll between two spectacular 90s comics. Now, I didn't create this poll. The man on the other end of this mic did. His name, you may know him. I would figure so. If you're a fan of the Unspoken Decade and the UnspokenDecade.com, his name is Dean Compton. Dean Compton, welcome to the Unspoken Issues podcast, sir.
Yeah, I was going to say, I didn't just create the poll. I created this whole shebang, son. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I am the purveyor of the Unspoken Decade.
That is
right.
I
mean, the arbiter, the guy who has kicked out a lot of people, much to their chagrin and much to many others, including my delight. But, I ain't been able to sashay my way into this here Unspoken Issues yet. So we're going to have a good time. You had the poll, a lot of fun. The 90s was a time, arguably, when Alan Moore was at his most prolific. So, put head to head a couple of his single issues, and see how they stand. Top 10 versus Supreme.
Tell me about Top 10, because this was a comic book I didn't even know existed. Well, tell me a little bit about it.
Top 10 takes place in a city where everybody has superpowers. It looks like it's a place where people with superpowers were relegated to following. I can't remember. It's been a long time since I've read Top 10, but I think they were relegated there, to keep normal people safe. And also, for, everybody to keep an eye on each other. And it was in the wake of some kind of war, some kind of possibly World War II, maybe a war in that universe between the USSR and the United States. But I can't remember the particulars of that. But basically, Top 10 focuses on a police precinct.
Okay.
And it's the 10th precinct of the city, which I forget the name of. But it just focuses on those cops. It's a superhero procedural, if that makes any sense.
Sure.
There's detective work. There's, you get to know the characters. A bit of, it's like Hill Street Blues meets the Justice League of America.
Yeah, I had never heard of the comic. When the poll went up, me and you have talked in the past, buddy. Supreme is my favorite comic book character. You put Supreme number 42 up against Top 10. So I had to go do a little bit of research, find out what is this Top 10 all about. Went down to the local comic book shop here in my neck of the woods. The owner was like, look, you need to check out Top 10. I was like, okay. So he goes and grabs the trade off the shelf, which he had, Top 10 trade there. And he was showing me some of the inside. He was he was kind of excited to kind of show off what was going on in this book. The one thing that he pointed out was there's a ton of Easter eggs throughout the book.
Oh, yeah, it is chock full. It is a love letter to science fiction, horror, and superhero comic books and all those tropes. Yeah. And, to have that book right on hand, now that's some service. Give your boy a plug, man. Maybe somebody's in that area, they'll stop in.
Jordan Lowe, go check out Asylum Comics down in Marietta, Ohio. Jordan runs his own podcast as well. I'll give that a plug. That's Kapow, the Pop Culture Podcast. I've had the opportunity to guest over there, and I know he's most likely listened to a few Unspoken Issues as well. So we appreciate his business, and I appreciate the knowledge he bestowed upon me, because what he showed me, all he had to do was just crack open the book and take a look at this, take a look at this.
It's a beautiful book.
I need to read that. But here's the thing. We put this poll up, like I said, Top 10 number 1 versus Supreme number 42, and we let the Unspoken Decade fans on Facebook choose which one we are going to cover tonight. And it turns out, here's the results. As a matter of fact, I have them right here. Top 10 number 1 got 31 votes. And then Supreme number 42 got 49. So out of a total of 80 votes, Supreme is the winner. And we're going to be talking about that issue tonight. Can you give me an idea as to why you chose Supreme number 42?
Because it's toward the start of Alan Moore's run here. I think it actually starts with number 41. But number 41 is very inside baseball. In fact, it's almost a peculiar way to start a revitalization and a revision and a reboot of a character. It works. It works especially if you read the entire story. but I felt like, you know, it would be hard to translate it into a podcast as far as a single issue, because there's a lot of things that get very meta in number 41. It gets very like, it doesn't quite break the fourth wall, but it's very wink, wink, nudge, nudge in regard to like continuity, in particular Superman continuity, Superman history, the Superman mythos. And I'm not saying 42 doesn't. 42, you know, sticks with it, but it's more the start of the story of this incarnation of Supreme. While number 41 is almost like a Vertigo-esque intro to what's going to happen. Number 42 is a much more straightforward comic, although in its own way is decidedly not so straightforward.
So most likely tonight is going to be a little bit of therapy for myself. And
lay on the couch. Let Supreme tell Supreme your problems.
If you had a chance to check out the comments on this post, I was young at the time. I was a teenager, and Supreme number 41 hits the stands.
Yeah.
And now I didn't know about the storied history of Alan Moore. You know, I was a comic book reader where I was just grabbing my favorite comic book with my favorite comic book character in it off the shelf. I wasn't paying attention really to a whole lot of writers, although I knew some names.
Sure.
Alan Moore wasn't one that I can actually say that I knew much about back in the 90s. It is.
Because he had written Spawn, he had written Violator by this point. He had done 1963. I think he'd even worked on Wildcats by this point. So not only was Alan Moore, you know, storied, he had already built a solid legacy in the 80s, you know, with Watchmen, V for Vendetta, etc. But he was very of the now. I mean, you couldn't be hotter than to be creating books for Image, and he was creating some of the hottest books with some of the hottest characters with some of the hottest artists of the time at Image. So I mean, obviously, I'm not trying to come across like, oh man, that Jesse, what a fucking idiot. But like, I find it really hard to believe that like you didn't know he was. He was all over Wizard Magazine and Hero Illustrated at the time. But you know, it's amazing what bubble you can be in.
And that's the truth, dude. That's pretty much what it is. I was in a bubble. The comic shop that we had at the time, you know, that guy focused on selling Magic cards and baseball cards. So it's not like, you know, hey, you're getting a new Alan Moore issue, and then we carry on a conversation. That was not the case.
Right. He probably only started selling comic books, you know, in like 1991 anyway.
That's probably when the store opened.
I mean, that's what happened. A lot of guys who sold baseball cards when the baseball card market collapsed around late 1990, early 91. Right about the same time, we have the Spider-Man #1, you have X-Force #1, you have X-Men #1, literally selling millions of copies. The Image is about to, you know, explode. So to retain the speculator dollar that they had been accustomed to gleaning, they jumped from baseball cards into comic books and then promoted books as hot items instead of, you know, hey, what, you know, like you're saying, hey, we got this Alan Moore book, or your boy at Asylum Comics is like, hey man, top 10, let me talk to you about it for a few minutes. They didn't know shit from apple butter about most comics, except, you know, this was a #1, or it had a foil cover, or you know, it's going to be worth something one day. You know, they were there to fuel the speculator market. Not all of them, certainly, but a decided majority of the people who went from baseball card shop ownership to comic book shops at that time were just, you know, they were chasing the buck.
Mm-hmm. So imagine my surprise when I pick up Supreme number 41 and this hero that I come to love because I thought he was okay, yeah, if you want to compare him to Superman, he was like Superman with an attitude. All right.
Right.
That's why I love Supreme. He was, especially in the earlier issues, he was very ruthless. If there was a problem, he had no qualms trying to solve it as quick as he could by just deleting your face somehow. I mean, it was
taking Thor's hammer.
Yeah, you know, that was the Supreme that I liked. For some reason, I was really wrapped up into that story. So there was 41 hits, and we have this, I mean, immediate turnaround.
Yeah. I mean, you're like, where's this like extreme Terminator-esque Superman type guy who's like punching through people's hearts and shit? You're like, I've got Supramouse.
Dude, I can't believe how much of it just felt like such a stark contrast to what I was reading. And I remember reading through the issue, and people today give Image a hard time about being knockoffs of certain Big Two properties. Well, this to me...
And deservedly so in a lot of ways.
That's fine, but this to me was like, oh yeah, we're going to take it up to about level 10 here. This is our take on Superman. And here is all of this in the back. Now, it's been a while since I read 41, and I can tell you that amongst my issues, I do not own issue 42. And I don't know if it's because I was so upset that I did not go out and find the next issue of Supreme, but I can tell you, and I mentioned this in the comments, I wrote a letter. This is the first ever letter that I ever wrote to any comic book company, expressing my displeasure on Alan Moore. Who's this Alan Moore guy?
Dear ass faces, Jesse thinks this should be a lot different.
I mean, who is this Alan Moore guy? What has he done with my hero? Why am I looking at this? Supremium? Supremium? Talking about Supremium? I mean, oh, dude, I was very, very upset. So fast forward, I've learned about Alan Moore. Heck, I've been part of a podcast that did an Alan Moore month where we read the stories compared to the movies. Alan Moore has become, I've forgiven Alan Moore for what he's done.
You hear that, Alan? Hatchetberry.
He's really he's been on pins and needles as to whether I've forgiven him or not.
He crosses your name off a list like you said he did in like Billy Madison. It was like, oh, good. I don't have to kill this guy now.
Yeah, he does. He has some kind of magic spell. It's got my name in it. Hopefully, he's crossed that shit off.
He just undid it. You're lucky.
Thank goodness. But I mean, yeah. So I was really upset. But now that I've come to know what he's done and what the intent was, I was like, okay, I kind of understand what he was doing. But have I gone back and read any Supreme since I was that upset? And I think I went back and read, like, oh my goodness, I think it was there was a series that they did in the 50s. It was, I should say, in the issue 50s. I can't remember what it was called now. Alan Moore was at the helm on this one. I read it. I thought it was decent. But going back to issue 42, being that this is the first time I read that issue, I started having flashbacks.
So you and Supreme are the same.
True. I mean, the history started crystallizing around me.
You stared at a crater where you had thrown down your Supreme comics and wrote a hateful, harshly worded letter.
Yep.
And you remembered all of those emotions and everything.
Gosh, I wish I had that letter. I know I was young enough to understand I didn't want to curse, but man, oh man, if I could have, I would have.
I think one of the things about Alan Moore's Supreme and the early Extreme Supreme, and I mean, to an extent, you can probably throw like Cyberforce and Wildcats and Pitt to an extent into this kind of thing. A lot of people just thought that they were, and still to this day think that they were like super just carbon copies of the X-Men or Hulk or what have you. And to an extent, I mean, carbon copies is probably a little strong, but yeah, they had decidedly strong overtones. Like you could tell Supreme was a Superman analog, and you could tell that Wildcats was not quite an X-Men analog, but certainly heavily inspired by recent work that Jim Lee had done in X-Men and Uncanny X-Men. Yeah, you could see the Hulk influence at Dale Keown's Pitt, and people talk about this as a travesty, but like that's just it's really weird how when it comes to 1990s comics, that's an incredible sin, but that's something that's happened throughout comic books like forever. Mm-hmm. Like there have always, like, you think about the Squadron Supreme, you think about like the Crusaders, which was like I think they were an Invaders analog that DC used. There are other ones. There's like an analog in the Marvel universe there's several for Superman, Blue Marvel or Black Marvel, and Hyperion from Squadron Supreme, like I said. The Aquarian was one for a little bit, Wondar the Aquarian. This isn't like, I mean, I don't know why that like they got so damned for, probably because they were so successful, because they sold like millions of comics, and so people got, they just fucking rip it off. But two things, like I said, number one, that's happened, as far as comic books, have been. Number two, they were really ripping off themselves in a way, right? If this was a ripoff, and I don't think it was, but to use those terms the way certain individuals would, put it, if it was a ripoff, they were just ripping off themselves. Like when John Fogerty got charged with plagiarism, and they're like, well, you can't plagiarize yourself. Look, if Wildcats looked like Jim Lee's X-Men, X-Men, it's because Jim Lee was fucking doing them both.
That's
if
right.
Cyberforce looked like Mark Silvestri's X-Men, bro, it's because he was doing the work he had just been doing. So let's, I think that it's funny that when, like, Image gets damned, Supreme gets damned, these characters get damned, those creators get damned. This is just something that just happened. If Youngblood looks like X-Force, of course it does.
Mm-hmm.
Of course it does, because like this is what the guy was just doing. He's doing it for another company now. I think Alan Moore's Supreme, goes to a different level where it's difficult for people to levy that accusation against this particular run of Supreme because it falls into like homage territory. You know what I mean? And people can see that as like high art. And on some level, these are the best Silver Age Superman stories, and arguably the best Superman stories I've ever read is Alan Moore's Supreme. Like, I was not a fan of the Silver Age bullshit Superman stories with like 37 different colors of kryptonite and a bunch of imaginary stories where, like, Paul Kent grows a tail and becomes a demon, or whatever, and all that. And I just thought they were hokey and stupid. But because of Alan Moore's run on Supreme, he showed me what there was to love in them, which is just the utter whimsy and the utter amount of fun that you can have in a world where, like, it's in a world centered around a guy who can, like, see the atoms split on the sun. It means that, like, there's no limit to, like, what you can do because he can just do anything. So whatever you can imagine can become something. And you'll see that later. If we were to go on and read more of these Supreme issues, you would see that. But I think those accusations of plagiarism and just, ripping, the rip-off stuff, it kind of goes away with this because, like I said, people see homage as something different. It's like, oh, it's a love letter to those Silver Age Superman things. On the other hand, Jim Lee, if he has two guys with claws, he's a rip-off guy. And I think that's...
I want to ask you, and I'm by no means some comic historian, so I'm sure that there's something similar like this has probably happened in the past in comics history. But have you ever seen a comic book character or comic books take that big of a turn in such a short amount of time as what was going on in Supreme before compared to Alan Moore taking it over?
Well, I think it's happened several different times in comic book history for sure, but I think one of the things that immediately comes to mind, and I don't want to talk too much about this because I'm not an expert on this stuff. I really need to educate myself a little more, but Legion of Superheroes fans talk about the 5 years later storyline where, like, everything jumped ahead 5 years.
I've heard of that.
It was all different. The characters were, I think the characters were grimmer. They were put in more desperate situations, etc. So what immediately comes to mind is very similar is the 5 years later. The reboot of The Punisher in the late 90s, kind of similar, where they're like, oh, now he's a super angel with magic guns.
Yeah.
Or whatever. That was a very abrupt departure from what had come forward. But, I don't know that it's quite on the level of those two, but those two things immediately come to mind. And there's lots more. I'm sure. And hey, people who are listening, tell us about them in the comments.
Yeah, we'd love to hear from you. So Alan Moore Supreme, I'm taking this straight from the wiki. I just want to read this real quick. Rob Liefeld asked Alan Moore to write for Supreme. Moore agreed on the condition that he could reinvent the character since he felt the comic was not very good. Beginning with issue number 41 of Supreme, Moore began retooling the character with each issue containing commentary on storytelling, comics history in general, and Superman in particular. Cliches of the superhero genre were frequently used. Moore said in later interviews that his reimagining of Supreme's background and origin was an apology for the darkness of previous works at other publishers. He had a reputation for the cynical deconstructing of superheroes, such as Batman the Killing Joke, Swamp Thing, and Watchmen. All very, very popular renditions of those comic book characters. My goodness, I read Swamp Thing, The Autopsy, where Alan Moore took over. We did that for source material. Holy shit.
There's another one, to be honest. Another, like, abrupt departure from what had come before.
Yeah, you're right, man. That was probably one of the biggest. I mean, it turned everything on its ear.
It completely inverted everything.
Yeah.
One of the things I'd like to point out is that I'm a bigger fan of the Alan Moore Supreme than, like, the Extreme Supreme. But I have always liked the Extreme Supreme too. And one of the reasons is, even though he's obviously a Superman analog, I think we should really think about him more, honestly, like he acts more like Namor. In all honesty, like, he has this soft side and he can be appealed to, and he gets he gets passion, but he also, he also has an incredibly strong arrogance streak. He has a mean streak. He gets vindictive. And so I think it's funny, it's kind of like when people compare the original Doom Patrol, the original X-Men, and Arnold Drake, the guy who created, or at least co-created the Doom Patrol, he's like, actually, they're really supposed to be like the Fantastic Four. And you look at him like, oh man, yeah, this is actually a lot more like the Fantastic Four. While I think obviously the power set and a lot of the similarities, the cape, the visual similarities were taken from Superman, I've always really thought of Extreme Supreme as much more of a Namor type guy. And I don't feel like he actually is fermented in my mind and heart as a Superman. Like we were getting all the Supermans from all the different possibilities in the Omniverse, all the, multiverse of the DC universe and the Superman analogs elsewhere. I don't think until like Alan Moore's run did that really become cemented to me as a Supreme. Did Supreme become cemented to me as a Superman type guy? In many ways.
Yeah. So here we go. There's two stories that happen in this issue. I mean, pretty much it's kind of a walk back in time. Supreme's. So yeah, he heads back to Little Haven, which is his hometown. Obviously things have changed a little bit there at the old hometown. It was the town known as, this is where Kid Supreme grew up. And it's the 90s. Things have changed for sure. People have become a little bit more disgruntled. But anyway, he's walking back. He's just kind of going down a trip through memory lane. Our first story is kind of an origin story. Well, it is the origin story. It's the origin of Supreme. And let's give a shout out to the creators real quick. I think I'd have that in my notes before we hop into it totally.
Well, Alan Moore wrote it, obviously.
Yeah.
Joe Bennett was the penciler of the non-50s, 60s style stuff.
That's right.
Norm Rapin inked it, and Rick Veitch did all of the old style stuff. Todd Klein is the letterer, too, who I think he's very underrated as a letterer.
Yeah, this...
well, not underrated. I mean, very great. I shouldn't say underrated.
Okay.
Everybody knows who he is.
Todd Klein. Got it. Rick, the flashback sequences are penciled in a great Silver Age style. It looks wonderful. It's a perfect contrast to, Supreme walking into Little Haven in the 90s. All right, so Supreme's origin. And by popular demand, we bring you the amazing facts behind the man of majesty in the origin of Supreme, who he is and how he came to be. So we get an origin story here where young Ethan Crane finds a meteorite in the woods while walking his dog. The meteorite leaves him and his dog Radar chalk white. But as he recovers, much to the surprise of his parents, he finds he has remarkable powers. Adopting the name Kid Supreme as he grows older, he does his level best to keep Little Haven safe from the likes of Master Meteor, Corgo the Space Devil, and the evil Darius Dax. Soon he grows into a man, and after a visit with his friend Dr. Wells, he drops the Kid from his name, and Supreme heads to space to build his Citadel Supreme. Soon the battle overseas calls, and Supreme joins the army to help fight foreign threats. All right. Now, I didn't go into all the details there. I understand what Alan Moore's trying to do here. He's obviously using the style of Superman in the Silver Age to kind of tell this story. What do you think of the first half of this? I'll get into the second part here in a second. But yeah, my only notes here was, oh boy, the Silver Age was not where I was wanting to go with this character. But
I beg to differ. First off, it's important to note that not only is Ethan Crane Supreme taking a trip down memory lane, but he doesn't quite remember what's happening because in the last issue, like we talked about, in a very meta way, there's been a continuity reset, and the impact on him as a character. So one of the most interesting things about this is, while on the one hand it is a love letter to the Silver Age Superman and his adventures and his abilities, etc. But on the other hand, it's also quite a commentary on the constraints of comic book continuity and what it would actually mean on some level to be a character in a world where reality would be rewritten and rewoven, very, not just in a hard way where you're like, oh, wow, I don't remember things now, but it's done consistently, in many ways because of the schism between Image and Maximum Press. You can argue that this is kind of the third type schism type thing that Supreme's been involved in on a meta continuity level. So I find that interesting. I also want to say I find the Silver Age stuff, I think it's beautiful. It's masterfully done in every possible way. It's never straight copying. It's nothing you haven't seen before, but it's been shined up, really, really nice. Like, I must own, a million Jason figures, but I'll buy another one if you give me one that is, shined up real good. That axe looks real good. That machete looks real good. That Jason Voorhees coming home with me. Got good packaging. I don't need any more. You arguably don't need any more of these of this type of homage story, but it's done so well. Rick Veitch is like one of the most underrated comic book talents in my opinion, and he's very well known, and I think he's very well regarded by a lot of people, but he should be regarded on a higher level than he is. He followed Alan Moore on Swamp Thing, and I find his run to be just about as good, which is crazy considering that I think that run on Swamp Thing might be the best comic books of all time. But he doesn't lose more than say a quarter of a step, maybe half a step off of it, which means it's still really good, because if that's the best, you just fall that pace, you fall to that pace, you're still doing, fine. I love the homage. I love the wink, wink, Joe and Joanna, Supreme's parents. I enjoy the wordplay with Supremium, Kid Supreme, and then he's the Supramite, etc. And I'm a mark for crypto, so I'm also a mark for radar. It's great to see that there is a crypto analog here. I just think the whole thing's chock full of fun.
Oh, all right then.
You're like I vehemently disagree.
Well, no. Here's the thing. Again, it's hard for me to swallow where I was at before and jumping into this with such a very, very different representation of what we got in the book now compared to what came before. Well,
you don't think Extreme Supreme is going to join the army and go fight the Nazis or whatever World War II? He totally did that.
Yeah, I was going to say he did that, which is fine. It's very, oh my goodness, what is the best way to wholesome?
Wholesome. It does come across as very wholesome, but not hokey, which is a tough thing to pull off.
Yeah,
I think.
Yeah, I agree. And if anything that came before this, it definitely was not. I did not see Supreme in the wholesome light at issue 3 or 4, of Supreme. So again, it's I'm working through it, Dean. I'm working through it. Let me work through it. Man.
You have like Supreme PTSD, right?
Maybe, but this is a great take on the Silver Age and taking this character and putting him back there. All I see is this. I don't know enough Silver Age Superman other than just what I've seen. I've never read a whole lot. So when it comes to comparing this to that on a writing level, I'm sure Alan Moore's got miles on whatever came before. You mentioned that there were some bull crap stories, and I've heard those. I've heard people talk about some of them.
But there's also some fantastic stories and some fantastic ideas that have lasted through today as part of the Superman mythos, like Crypto, Supergirl, The Fortress of Solitude, the first Death of Superman story. It was an imaginary story that took place. It's still highly regarded today. A lot of the work that Otto Binder did is still highly regarded. Kurt Swan, Murphy Anderson, still very highly regarded today. That having been said, there's some clunkers, like I said, where it's like, oh my God, Jimmy Olsen, he's grown a fucking burrito out of his butt or whatever, I mean, and I admit those clunkers exist, but there's a real charm to them. And I wasn't into them until after I read this Supreme. I was more on your side before this.
Okay. All right. So let's hop back in here to this issue and get to our second spot. So as Ethan Crane is checking out his, he's kind of going down memory lane there by the crater where he first found the Supremium meteorite. Hey, by the way, Ethan Crane is a comic book artist?
Yeah, he pencils and inks, baby. Does it all. Does it
4 minutes. What was it? 4 minutes? Let's take a look here. From 6:30 to 6:34, penciled and inked Omni-Man number 246.
Right.
Speedy delivery.
Eat your heart out, Jim Aparo. No, for real, Jim Aparo, what a legend. I love that guy.
In our second story, the hoaxers from beyond history. Kid Supreme needs to rescue his girlfriend Judy from Darius Dax. But instead, there is an imposter Kid Supreme apparently on the scene trying to rescue Judy. We soon learn that this doppelganger has friends, and these friends came to rescue Supreme before the battle turned ugly. Soon, Zayla Zarn explains they are from the League of Infinity with other members Witch Winch, Giganthro, Young Bill Hickok, and Boy Achilles, and they had to stop Darius Dax before he used the Supremium meteorite against Supreme. Luckily, the mission is successful, and Kid Supreme, I think this is Kid Supreme at the time, Supreme accepts their invite to become a member of the League of Infinity. Okay, now am I right here in saying that this is like the Legion?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So this is kind of like
this is obviously the Kid Supreme being the Superboy analog. You know, Superboy is where the Legion of Superheroes first appeared, and Superboy would be not just become a member, but to me, and I think a lot of people, I think of them as Superboy and the Legion of Superheroes. For me, the Legion of Superheroes includes Superboy and Supergirl, just because, like, when I picture, you've seen every Legion, like, poster or cover, where it's got all 8,314 members of the team. I don't know how many are actually there. It's a friendly shot.
That's why I'm scared of even picking up a book.
Right. But it's always Superboy and like Supergirl at the forefront. So, and in fact, I think there was a cartoon 15 years back or so, Superboy and the Legion of Superheroes. So he's synonymous with it. So it makes sense that Kid Supreme would, have some kind of analog for that. And the League of Infinity, it's not just, I think that's the thing. It's just a little twist. Obviously, it's the Legion of Superheroes. That's what you're supposed to think. But the guys Alan Moore puts in this league, Young Bill Hickok, Giganthro, Teen Achilles. I mean, it's just fun. They have the time tower where like Supreme waves to himself because he's in the 90s, and you'll see that later. Like later on, that event will occur during Alan Moore's run where he waves to to his young self.
Oh, neat.
I mean, it's just a fun concept. And there's this, the neat little Easter eggs. Like one of the things is like, it isn't a robot decoy, a dream, or an impossible story in regard to the Kid Supreme doppelganger. Because, one of the things that Mort Weisinger's Silver Age Superman, because he was the editor of all those books, and in many ways, not necessarily the author, but like he would be like, hey, here's an idea, here's a cover idea, make a story out of it. So he was definitely, very involved on the creative end too. One of the things that like were a staple of that Silver Age time was the imaginary story. Like I mentioned earlier, the imaginary death of Superman story. They called them imaginary. I mean, they're all imaginary stories, but these were like what ifs or else worlds at the time. That's the term they used. And these were big, because they could, for the same reason you like to read Elseworlds or what ifs, they can fucking do anything they want. Well, they could do whatever they wanted to in those, which made for a more interesting time. And they were a hallmark of the age. So when he says it's not an impossible story, like that's just a neat little wink, wink, nudge, nudge there, to that term of imaginary story. And Alan Moore and Rick Veitch, they weave those throughout this tale. Darius Dax, obviously a young Lex Luthor, and his robot really looks like one of the contraptions that old Lex Luthor used to whip up.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely.
It's just beautiful. That's the other thing. Is like, even though this is Silver Age style, I can't get over how good it looks.
Mm-hmm. I enjoy the art. I like the throwback feel to it. It's all bright. It's very, very colorful. And there's nothing I'm going to complain in regards to that for sure. I've seen some bad Silver Age art too.
And I'm not trying to shit on the Silver Age guys, but when you look at it, sometimes some of it hasn't aged well. Some of it's just due to print condition. A lot of it though, obviously Jack Kirby, Kurt Swan, Bruno Premiani, a ton of other guys, Neil Adams, did a bunch of great stuff that has held up extraordinarily well. So I don't want to come across like I'm shitting on it, but I know at the time there would, like guys like you who had been reading Supreme, like what the fuck is this? Because it's such a stark difference in style well in comparison to the rest of the magazines and into what a lot of what Image was putting out at the time. And I think Rob was about to go Maximum Press. It's a lot different than what was coming out of Maximum Press or Extreme Press at the Extreme Studios at the time as well. So I think there was an inclination to shit on it just because it didn't look the same. But if you actually take a gander at it, it's just amazing art. Veach just knocks it out of the park. He just always does.
At the end of this story, as Ethan Crane is going through Little Haven in the 90s here, he comes across the grave of Darius Dax, his mortal enemy, which so now I'm looking at the dates that are on the tombstone. Darius Christian Dax, 1916 to 1968.
Yeah.
So that puts he was a teen. I mean, he was giving Kid Supreme a hard time. Would you say he's a teenager at that point? Would you say Darius is a teenager? He looks kind of young, but
yeah, he was. He calls himself. There's a part where it's he's like, I'm the world's most tremendous teen or something like that.
Okay. I'm trying to figure out the timeline now. So,
well, yeah, but you have to understand the timeline is very in line with when Superman first appeared, because you'll notice he joins the army, and I think it actually in one of them it just says the date itself many years ago. I believe the origin story takes place in the teens, so that he would be in his early 20s at the end of the origin story takes place like 1919, 1920, 1921. Found the date. It's 1933 when the Dax thing happens, when he fights Dax and the Tremendroid. What great name, by the way.
Yeah.
So 1933. So yeah, he would still be, I guess he's still a teenager then, right? He would have been like 17.
Yeah, right around then he would be. Yeah, that'd be right.
Didn't mean to cut you off, but when you solve a mystery, you got to tell the person who hired you. And I felt like you hired me, so I was on it.
All right, so yeah, well, then we fast forward a little bit more where Supreme is back on it. They're at saving a young lady and her son from a burning building, and it's just like really all this issue is kind of like a day in the life of Supreme. He goes back home just like everybody does. You go back home, you go to all the old familiar haunts. Now, granted, he doesn't know all this stuff. He's just kind of being led by his, all this stuff is kind of forming in his brain, and he's kind of learning all of it along with the reader, which is neat. I mean, that's actually really cool because he's just like us. We have no idea what the world is going to be after Alan Moore takes over, and Supreme's in the same boat. So as he's walking along and learning and remembering all this stuff, we're experiencing that with him, which is pretty neat. I like that concept. Yeah, and then he's just back in the big city doing Supreme things. So I will tell you, I enjoyed it. It was as much as I gripe about how much I remember being upset about it. Here's what I think at some point I'm going to try and do. I am going to try and go back, and I want to just read. I want to read from issue 0 up to the end. And there's not too many issues. What I think we're talking like maybe 60. Yeah,
I think 62, 68, 68 issues. So plus a 0 issue. If you read some other crossover stuff, but if you don't, but yeah, around like 68, 69 issues.
Okay, I had a good time, man. So give me your final thoughts here on Supreme number 42.
Like I've said several times, I think this is a masterpiece of a run. I think the terrific reimagining of Superman's mythos and, taking what's really good about them and, kind of concentrating them and getting them down to their base essence and then, kind of growing them into something similar but a little different. I think it's pulled off very well. I think, like I said, I think the Silver Age parts are just beautiful. I think Rick Veach just, really draws him great. And I don't know how, he probably influenced some of the writing too, even though Alan Moore wrote it. Veach, is a masterful writer in his own right. He may have suggested a thing or two, so I don't want to say, he didn't come up with anything. I don't know. I wasn't a part of it. The thing I have to say about it really made me want to read the rest. I wound up reading like the next 3 issues because I was like, it's just really good. It makes you want to read more of it. I know what's ahead, and it just makes me happy to be like, oh yeah, what a great story. It's great to just dive in and get this little tidbit, but I would recommend to anyone, go read this, go read the whole story arc. Those are, that's basically my thoughts that, this was good. I think there are better issues in the future, but like I said, I wanted to pick this one because it was more toward the start and it was going against top 10 number 1. So I wanted that to be sort of fair. So, we gave them more.
Yeah, we did. Well, hey, on the Unspoken Decade Facebook page, we had a little bit of commentary from a few people, but they all pretty much echo exactly what you're saying. Our good friend from Resurrections, an Adam Warlock and Thanos podcast, Al Sedano, chimed in. He says it's one of his favorite series ever. Michael Allen Carlisle says the idea was to perfectly homage the Silver Age stories, which Moore did in an admirable fashion, and with a clever hook contrasting it with the modern 90s Age of Hero tales. I loved every minute of both The Return and Story of the Year. So yeah, there's a lot of people that definitely look at Alan Moore's run, and just like many of his books that he's ever touched, he's a brilliant writer. So to kind of get this early taste of what he's going to do on Supreme, spectacular. So I'm not against reading more of it just to see what it does. I need reminded is what it is. I need reminded. I need to give this again. It's something I need to give a chance. Not be so caught up in my emotions from, what was that, 25 years ago? Man. But
well, I understand those opinions they got formed when you were 12, 13, 14, 15 years old. They're pretty hardline opinions, and it can be hard to deviate from them. But I think if you gave this whole run a chance, you'd wind up really liking it.
All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's going to bring Unspoken Issues to a close. Now, over on UnspokenDecade.com, I did type in Supreme just to see what we kind of find. And there definitely there's 3 pages worth of articles that may contain the word Supreme somehow. I don't know if we have any Supreme-centric articles over there, but whatever your pleasure, go hop on the UnspokenDecade.com. Take a look at some of the great writing we have over there. Dean, I know, has wrote plenty of articles. We have Chris Armstrong. Yeah. Chris Armstrong, he's contributed. We got plenty of people. Emily Scott's been dropping some stuff on there.
Simby fan.
Simby fan's been, yeah. So he's
a workhorse, man. That guy gets it done. About an article a month, Mr. Terrific.
I guess. Do you have anything to plug, sir, other than what I just did? If you want to plug it again, go for it.
No, I mean, obviously head over to the UnspokenDecade.com, take a gander at those articles. I'll try and whip one up again real soon. I don't know when I'll be able to, because things have been so busy, but we're still plugging away. We'll be doing another poll for one of we just finished a poll with G.I. Joe and the Transformers. Oh, yeah. So we'll be doing Transformers number 80 soon, so watch out for that. I'll probably put up another poll in the next few days because it's a lot of fun, and we're going to do it again, Jesse.
So, yeah, shout out to the Rattleitch Broadcasting Network for hosting Unspoken Issues. Lots of great content over there, so if you guys are interested, I do a podcast on there as well. It's called Source Material. We're getting close, ever so close. I think 2 episodes away from episode 250. I don't know exactly what that's going to be. I'm sure
put a foil cover on it.
Yeah, polybagged.
Right.
Yeah.
Comes with a trading card.
That's exactly what needs to be done. Yeah, so go check that out if you guys are interested. Just type in RADULICH. But for Dean Compton, I am Jesse Starcher. We are bringing Unspoken Issues to a close. Have a great one. We'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.